So I'm calling this video Step Up Watches. What do I mean by that? Let's say you're collecting micro brands, Hamilton, Certina, maybe Tissot, the Swatch Group brands. Maybe you are a collector of micro brands, but you want something a little bit different, something a little bit more. These are the step up brands that we're going to be talking about today in this video. By step up, I do mean a step up in price, but you are also getting a step up in design. These are watches that look very different from what you would normally get at that sub $1,000 price. Maybe independent watches are starting to pique your interest. These are watches that will help scratch that itch, but it won't break your wallet. These are somewhat affordable watches. And when I use the word somewhat affordable, there are features on these watches that would cost a lot more money. However, because these are entry-level independent watches, they don't, and you are getting a lot of watch for the money spent. So somewhat affordable may not be affordable for everyone, but that is the general idea here. I have a bunch of watches to talk about, so let's start with my number one pick. So as I mentioned in the intro, these are watches that are a little bit out of the ordinary. At least one aspect of each one of the watches that we're going to talk about in this list is a little bit out of the ordinary, special, something that you normally wouldn't see in your everyday affordable watch. I'm going to start with a brand that is leading the way with some really interesting watches. They started with a jump hour and now they have just come out with a world timer. I am talking about Space One. Space One is a watch that I actually own. I own their Tellurium, which is a little titanium watch that has 3 globes in it. There's a sun, an earth, and a moon. It's a calendar watch. It gets blued elements and a grade 5 titanium case. It's powered by a Swiss movement. All of their watches are powered by Swiss movements. However, they look incredible. These are watches that look like an MB&F or an Urwerk. However, they cost a lot less money. Their original watch, which was their jump hour, came in at around $1,500 to around $2,200, depending on the materials. The Tellurium and their world timer, is really interesting because all of the functions are split out and it's actually wearable. When you look at this watch, you think that can't be wearable, but it is. I've seen it in person, I've tried it on, and it's actually wearable. It looks crazy, like no other world timer that you've seen, but I think they've done a very tasteful job in making these watches, and even though they are crazy, they are wearable and they look good on wrist. Those watches, the Tellurium and that world timer, come in just under $4,000. Yes, that is a lot of money, but when you consider the design here and what you're getting, I'm telling you, these are really cool watches. Today's video is brought to you by Chronographs. If you guys are sick of paying high fees when buying and selling on places like eBay and Chrono24, check out chronographs.com, where currently there are absolutely no fees buying or selling. That means you get a better price when you are buying and getting a better price when you are selling. So definitely check out chronographs.com, an enthusiast-based marketplace started by John P. of the John P. YouTube channel, and currently the only marketplace that offers no fees. Definitely check them out at chronographs.com. The next watch brand is a brand that I will have in my collection one day. It is Albishorn. Albishorn make imaginary watches inspired by real watches. So essentially, they make imaginary predecessors to iconic watches. One of my favorites is their Type 10, an imaginary predecessor to the Type 20, another watch that I absolutely love. I love the Type 10 because of its design. It gets a very heavily modified Valjoux 7750. However, you're getting a mono pusher chronograph with a really interesting display. It is a bi-compact layout, a rotating bezel. All in all, these watches just look way more expensive than they actually are. And that's because the designer behind these watches used to make very, very high-end watches, and now he has his own company. These are fantastic. I love everything about them. And again, it's another watch that I've gotten hands-on with. These are very wearable, and they keep on coming out with new iterations of it, and I'm very excited to see what they do next. But I think it's the Type 10 for me. I think I will own one of those in the very near future, and I love that dial. These are COSC certified, and they come in at around $4,000 or $5,000, depending on the exchange rate. Very good looking watches, really nicely made, and again, something extremely different. Ming, a brand that I talk about very often here, and recently, mostly because I am saying that they are very good value on the secondary market, starting at around $2,000 and obviously going up from there. For what you're paying, you are getting a really interesting watch. Ming have their own design DNA. When you see someone with a Ming on their wrist, you immediately know it's a Ming, and that is something that is very hard to do. They have already made a name for themselves in the watch industry. They use really high-grade movements in a lot of their watches, but their standard watches get somewhat of standard movements like Sellita and Etta. However, they put a lot of work into those movements to make them stand out and make them a little bit more special than their standard counterparts. You are also getting a lot of design on those dials. It's a minimalistic look, but they are using lume and different materials to really make the dials special. It really is a love it or hate it style. However, I have to say, Ming are really nicely made watches, and they have a very distinctive look. If you're looking to get into independent watches, these are a great brand to start with because, like I said, on the secondary market, you can get them for a very good price, and they are reliable, good looking, and they're pretty easy to flip. So really great watches to get into if you want something that is different and a step up from your everyday micro brand. The next two brands on this list are from two very high-end brands who decided to come out with a more affordable watch for the masses. And what they did is they came up with some very interesting designs and made them more affordable. The first watch we're going to talk about is Gron from the Gronfeld brothers. This is a very good looking watch in my opinion. You have a two-tone dial. The center portion is a stamped grained texture, which looks really good. Obviously, this is from the Gronfeld brothers. This is a very tastefully done watch. It says Gron on the dial. It has a Gronfeld crown. It's actually almost exactly the same as the crowns that are used on Gronfeld. These are powered by a Sellita movement, the SW210. They've done a little bit of a modification to that movement to make the winding a little bit nicer. Stainless steel cases. All in all, these look like a baby Gronfeld. And that's the reason why I think a lot of people like these. Recently on eBay, one sold for a very good price, around $1,500. But brand new, these are around $2,200 anyway. So if you want one of these, and they've been releasing different batches over the past year or so, definitely stay tuned to Gron and the Gronfeld brothers if you're interested in this watch. And again, it's a fun step up from a micro brand, and that's why I put it on this list. But if we're talking about a high-end brand coming out with a more affordable offering, the OG here is the Mad One watches from MB&F. These are made in the MB&F studio, obviously using materials and movements that aren't extremely high-end, but they are coming out with really creative watches. Fidget spinners for the wrist, because they really do focus in on the fact that they put large rotors or spinning elements on the dials, and that's kind of the theme so far with the Mad 1 and the Mad 2. Lots of lume, and they use affordable movements. They started out with a Miyota movement. Now they are using a Le Jouperet movement, which is based on a Miyota movement anyway, so kind of the same movement, just a Swiss version of it. These are love it or hate it as well, so either you're going to love the design on these or you're going to hate their designs, much like MB&F, but all in all, I think these are awesome watches for the prices. So these are just around $4,000. They were a little bit cheaper when they were using slightly less high-end movements. The Lejeune Perret has made these a little bit more expensive. Let's see what they do for the Mad 3. I'm always excited to see what MB&F are going to do next, and the Mad Galleries. The next watch brand on this list is a very funky watch brand that is an Italian brand that takes inspiration from Italian design, but also the American jet era, which is really cool. When you look at this watch, it doesn't look like anything else on the market. It's not a jump hour. However, it kind of resembles a jump hour. It's powered by a Lejeune Perret movement, and it has a very interesting display. There's a little window up at the top at the 12 o'clock, and that is where you tell the hours. In the center, there's a little disc, that's the seconds, and then you have another disc for the minutes. The case here is extremely interesting because it is a 7-piece case. And again, it is powered by a Lejeune Perret movement, which is the G100, the same movement that's used in the Mad One and a few other watches that are on this list. This is a really great movement that is somewhat high-end because it is coming from Lejeune Perret, but it is based on a Miyota movement, so it is reliable. This is a funky looking watch, and I'm not sure it's going to be for everyone. I have seen these in person, and they are really fun, and they're not all that expensive. This watch costs around $4,500, but considering how much goes into making something like this and something so interesting, obviously that is a pretty good price. And again, most of these watches are under $5,000, so you could definitely get these for around $4,500 brand new, and less than that if you look on the secondary market. Now, if you are a collector of micro brands, you are familiar with the next brand that I'm going to talk about, Zelos. Zelos make micro brand watches that are affordable. A lot of their watches cost under $500, and they are really well made. However, they are one of those brands that also make step-up watches, like their new skeletonized watches using the Marvin 700, a vintage movement that they took and brought down to bare bones, skeletonized it, and then DLC coated it. And they've made this movement look incredible, and they've put it in 2 watches so far. One is a Sky Raider and the other is the Artemis, I believe it's called. These are very affordable watches, even though they're getting very special movements. My favorite is the Sky Raider because you can get this on a bracelet, you get lume, it has small seconds, it's completely skeletonized, there's even lume on the case back, I have no idea why. You're getting a really good looking bracelet on this watch. It kind of reminds me of way higher end watches from way higher end brands, but it costs under $3,000. You're getting titanium with an extra hard coating, it's hand wound, and you get on the fly micro adjust. Everything about this watch screams that it costs more money, but it doesn't, and that's because it's a Zelos and they make very affordable quasi independent brand watches. The next brand on this list is Atelier Wen. I have made many videos about Atelier Wen because they make some pretty cool integrated bracelet watches. They are now sort of branching out from that in recent releases. However, their integrated bracelet watches is what I want to focus on in this video. They make some 904L stainless steel integrated bracelet watches that are made in China. They use a Chinese movement. I believe they use a peacock movement inside, automatic, very nicely made movement, and they are pretty reliable. I am very familiar with these movements, but it's the case and the bracelet that I want to talk about because they make some amazing cases and bracelets. They are very well finished like a Swiss watch. However, they are made in China. Also, their dials are extremely well made because they are handmade in China by a master artisan who guilloches each one of these dials by hand. So when you're talking about the world of watchmaking with handmade dials and really beautifully finished 904L stainless steel cases and bracelets, and by the way, they have one of the best micro adjusts that you will see on any integrated bracelet out there. You have to ask yourself, how do other brands charge so much more money for their watches when a brand like Atelier Wen can come out with a beautiful watch like this for around $3,000 to $3,500, somewhere in that range. Sometimes they're a little bit more depending on the materials. They use titanium and a bunch of other special materials, and they also have some really cool limited edition dials that they've been doing lately. But you're in that range and you are getting a very, very good looking watch with, like I said, one of the best micro adjusts that I've seen on no other watch at this price point. So we are coming towards the end of this video. However, I have a number of watches that I do want to go through, so I'm going to speed it up a little bit and I'm going to talk about just a few details about each one of these watches. I'm going to start with Ophion. I have featured their watches here on my channel before. I've talked about them many times. They make some really good looking watches that are inspired by much higher end watches. They use CNC guilloche dials. They have in-house movements made by Soprod. So they have a movement that is made by Soprod specifically for them. It's a hand-wound movement, and I have to say, it's a really good looking movement for the money, and I think it gets like 120 hours of power reserve, which is insane. And these aren't incredibly expensive. They are around $4,000 to $5,000. They've made some more expensive versions. There are versions that hit eBay pretty often for around $4,000 to $5,000. Great looking watches for excellent prices. Anordain is another brand that I have to mention here because some of their dials are incredible, especially for the price point. They fire enamel dials. They make them in a fume pattern, which is extremely hard to do, and they charge around $2,500 for their watches. They obviously go up from there. They use base movements like Sellita, Etta, and of course Le Jouperet, because everybody is now using Le Jouperet movements. These are more straightforward case design wise. It's the dials here that are important. And this brand is actually based out of the UK. So those dials are handmade in the UK. And again, starting at around $2,000 to $4,000. Really awesome watches. And if you wanted a dial like this, usually it would cost a lot more money from a major brand. Satori Biard is another brand that I want to mention here, very similar to Anordain. It's really a focus on the dial. They use guilloche, they use stone, they use a lot of different materials. You can customize your own dial. And again, the prices are between $3,000 and $10,000, depending on what you want to do. Beautiful watches, and of course they are using the Le Jouperet movement inside. They started out using Etta movements and Sellita movements. Now they're using Le Jouperet. They have a Le Jouperet hand wound movement. That's the more expensive version. Their automatics are slightly cheaper. Last but not least, I want to mention Christopher Ward. Christopher Ward are one of those brands that are sort of a gateway drug into higher end watchmaking. So you can go to Christopher Ward and buy a watch for around $1,000. They're great watches for every day. Could be a dive watch or a field watch, but they also offer watches like the Loco and the 12X, and of course, the one that started it all, the Bel Canto. The Bel Canto is an insane watch with a chiming mechanism that chimes out the hours. It's a hour striker. And then of course they came out with the 12X with their in-house movement, skeletonized in titanium and stainless steel in the 12 case. And now recently they've come out with the 12 Loco, an incredibly, insanely good looking watch that gets a bunch of different colors, and again, based on the 12. Every year I cannot wait to see what Christopher Ward are going to come out with. And these watches are high-end watches being offered at really good prices, under $5,000 for all three of those watches. And you could choose from each one. You could make a collection out of all three. They are insane. In fact, that's what I have. I have a collection of all three of them. I have all three of the watches that I just mentioned, and I love each one of them. So definitely cool watches and much higher end than their price tag. Tell me what you guys think down in the comments below about the list that I made today. There are definitely other watch brands that I could mention in this video. I probably will do a second video because there are so many other watches that I want to talk about, and I have written down on this list that I have in my hands, but I cannot go through because this video would be 10 hours long. Tell me down in the comments. I want to hear from you guys. What watches would you add to this list? Please don't forget to like and subscribe, hit that bell icon. It is super helpful to the channel, and I very much appreciate it. Anyway, guys, thank you for logging on. Thank you for watching this video. I will catch you guys in the next video.